Hello and welcome to Pickleball Therapy, the podcast dedicated to your pickleball improvement. It's the podcast with you in mind. I'm your host, Tony Roy. Hope you're having a great week. As you know, week to week in this podcast, we try and bring you content to make you think a little differently about your relationship with pickleball, about how you think about it, and hopefully give you a more productive way of interacting with this sport and for yourself personally, right? I mean, one of the beautiful things about anything we do in life, but obviously we're focused on pickleball here, but one of the beautiful things about pickleball is that we get to use it as it's kind of like a test lab, right? Or as a kitchen where we can grow as humans, right? So we get to develop ideas, develop thoughts about how we approach pickleball, how we interact with pickleball, and then we use those when we outside of pickleball. So, I always mention road rage, right? That's a common thing for some, but it's basically like, or upset because the person in front of you and the checkout line has a checkbook or something. You're like, I gotta get out of here. Some of these concepts that you're learning through the sport of pickleball are concepts that you can then use in those situations as well, just to help you navigate life in a more constructive and hopefully positive way. So we're going to continue that this week. And this week we're going to be talking about language. And here's the thing about language. There's a quote that I wanted to share with you. And it's about the impact of language on us. So this is an old Japanese samurai proverb. My wife Jill and I are watching the Shogun series. I don't know if you watched it when it was in the 80s, I think it was. I remember watching it as a child. I watched it probably, 6 times or something. We had it on the old cassette tapes, and it made a lot of impression on me. I read the book, and now watching the new version of it. So there's some good kind of philosophical concepts that you learn in those things, like the dream within the dream. But that's for another day. The one I want to focus on today is an old Japanese samurai proverb that says, "Do not speak bad of yourself, for the warrior within hears your words and is lessened by them." So the idea is that language affects us, right? And that shouldn't come as a surprise that, language is important. It's how we interact with our mind. And we did a prior episode. I'll look up the episode number in a second here, but we did an episode a few weeks ago dealing with mental plaque. And there we dealt with specifics about like how we talk to ourselves after a game, like that game sucked and things like that, the negative talk there. And it's just not a good way of doing it. It's episode 182. It's just negative talk like that for ourselves is not a good thing. But what I want to talk about this week is how we reference loss, right? Losing sporting events. And what has me thinking about it is, March Madness is going on, and you're hearing about upsets, right? So you're hearing like Kentucky lost, blue chip team lost to, a lesser team in quotes. And, it's considered an upset. It's considered a big thing, right? But the way we use, the words that we use whenever there's a loss involved does two things. One, it overplays it's hyperbolic, right? It's like hysteric, really, when you consider the big picture, and I'll talk about that. And the other thing is that it really diminishes our real losses, because as human beings, we will experience real loss in our lives, right? Friends, loved ones. I mean, there's real loss that happens. And we start using the same terminology to describe a game, right? The loss, in quotes, of a game. And, I think it's problematic, and it confuses our mind, and it needlessly could lead to excess negativity, and to, again, mental confusion, which is never a good thing. So some of the words that I was thinking about were, like the one I mentioned, upset, right? We talk about when the team that is not supposed to win or has the less chance of winning, right? I shouldn't say not supposed to win, because that's incorrect, right? It's the team with the less chance of winning wins. We refer to that as an upset. So think about any competitive situation, right? The two teams that are out there, barring some really bizarre circumstances, it's not 100% Team A is going to win and 0% Team B is going to win. There's some range of percentages that Team A is going to win and Team B is going to win. Even in lopsided situations, it's going to be, some percentage that Team B can win. I would suggest to you that in March Madness, it's never 5% for Team B. It's a reasonable number. It's a basketball game. Basketball games, what happened in that game was a player from the other team got hot, scored a bunch of points, and that was how Kentucky went down. But to say that it's an upset, right, suggests that there was something else that was supposed to happen and it didn't. Not really a good way of thinking about it. It's sort of like, think about like if there's a 30% chance of rain and it rains, what happened? Just the 30% happened, right? The 30% came true. If the Team B has a 30% chance of winning the game and Team B wins the game, what happened? Nothing. Just the 30% came true, right? And so, when we use words like upset, when we use words like we suffered a loss, imagine that language, right? We suffered a loss. In a sporting event, you suffered? That's unfortunate. We use terms like that was a heartbreaker, or it's a sporting event, folks. I mean, sometimes the team with the lower percentage wins. That's how statistics, probabilities work. It's not, again, anytime you ascribe a percentage to something, right? 20%, 30%, 40% to something, that means that it's going to happen sometimes. It's not zero. We talk about recovering from, bouncing back from, right? And I think the problem with using that terminology is that it sends our brain a message that whenever we do lose, and we will in fact lose, that it is worse than it is. Okay, and these two concepts kind of relate to each other, right? Because the reason it overamplifies, right, or it overstresses the quote unquote loss in a sporting event is because we use the same terminology when we suffer a real loss. And a real loss, again, would be like the most extreme would be, losing a loved one, losing a close friend, right? Losing a dear pet. I mean, there's serious losses that we have in our lives, right? And that's part of being alive. And when we start conflating, right, or mixing up this terminology, right, of a loss of a pickleball game or a loss at a tournament or a loss, in that context with a real loss, our brain can't differentiate, right? Our brain hears the same words, and so I mean, it's realistic. It's reasonable, right, for your brain to say, okay, well, this must be the same as that, right? Because it's the same word was used, and it's the same kind of terminology going around the event, right? So again, if you lost a loved one, right, you suffered a loss, and that could be a heartbreaker. I've done no doubt about that, right? We've all lost loved ones, and well, maybe not all of us, but most of us probably have lost a loved one or somebody close. And that's a loss. That's big, right? We go to play pickleball against, Tom, Dick, and Harry, right, on a Tuesday, and we lose. We didn't suffer a loss, okay? Not the same thing, not even in the same ballpark. And even if it's like, the best basketball team in the country losing against the weakest basketball team in the country, it's not the same thing. It's not the same magnitude. And I think it's important, going back to like the mental plaque, episode 182, and this kind of concept, I think we need to be guardians of the language that we use. We need to be careful, and we need to be thoughtful about the language that we use. I gave you the quote before from the old samurai proverb. There's another book that I've read. I believe it's called, I don't have it in front of me right now, but it's called The Four Agreements, I believe. And one of the most important agreements in that book, what basically the idea of the book is that there's like these four agreements that you enter into with yourself. And if you enter into those four agreements, you'll live a better life, right? You'll be happier and everything will be better, right? Because there's some sense to it, right? If you can stick to the four agreements. And as I recall, I know it's at least as important, if not the most important agreement, is your word. And by word, it doesn't mean like your promise. It means the words that come out of your mouth. So you need to be careful with the words that you use and choose, because words have consequence to them. Okay, and it's takes a minute to really reflect on this. Let me put it this way. I guess it would be easy to write this kind of podcast off, right? And just say, Tony just kind of lost his mind a little bit here, right? He's like, what's he talking about? It's just words, a big deal. I would suggest that it merits some reflection. And, that book, The Four Agreements, might be something to look at. Actually, I'll pull it up while we're talking here so I can give it to you. But, because the author articulates there it is. It's The Four Agreements. Yep. A Practical Guide to Personal Freedom. And it's based on the Toltec traditions and stuff from I'm probably misstating this, either Aztec or Mayan. I can't remember which one it is, but it's Don Miguel Ruiz is the book, the author, Don Miguel, Miguel, Ruiz, Ruiz, if you want to check out the book. But this concept isn't new. I'm not pulling this out of the air. That language is important. Excuse me. I'm just highlighting it in terms of our journeys as pickleball players and as humans. I don't have a proposal yet. It might percolate in my brain and I'll come up with something, but whether we call ourselves non-winners or opportunity brackets and things like that, those are all fine. But the main thing I wanted to point out was just be cognizant of when you hear terminology like that, like suffering a loss or being upset, that when you're out there in a competitive setting, the fact that the favored team did not win that contest is not an upset and does not mean that anybody suffered a loss. It just means that the contest ended and one team had more points or more runs or more whatever the defining characteristic or measurement of that sport is than the other team, and that's all that happened, nothing else. Anyway, so hopefully that'll help you as you go through your process, just guarding your mind against those apparently are on their facially insignificant things that are still going to affect you, even if they don't seem to be a big deal, because they build that kind of plaque or that kind of resistance inside your mind to events that at the end of the day are nothing more than normal expected events in the activity that we choose to engage in and that we love, that we call pickleball. All right, that's this week's podcast. Hope you enjoyed it. As always, please consider rating and reviewing it. Share with your friends. As always, I think I said as always twice. That's a lot of always. If you enjoyed the podcast, they probably will too. Have a great week, and I'll see you next time.